Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shailendra Yashwant from Climate Action Network South Asia. Like many of you, my colleagues here on the stage have spent the night squinting at the text, so if they slur a bit, please excuse them. Without much ado, I will quickly introduce the panel today. Sanjay Vashist, Director of Climate Action Network South Asia. Krishnaswamy Srinivas, Chief Executive Officer of Vasudha Foundation. Harjeet Singh from ActionAid International, and Anup Punya, also from CAN South Asia. So on the process so far.
Thank you, Shailendra. Let me share the process or overview, and then I'll give floor to my colleagues. The question that we are trying to answer here in Paris COP21 is if the world will have a global average temperature rise of 2.7 degrees or 1.5 degrees centigrade. We came to Paris with hope to have higher ambition in context of submitted INDCs that only promises 2.7 degree world. Considering the disasters happening in the various parts of the world, all we are building is threatened and getting destroyed. We saw that in Chennai floods also. Second version of text that was presented yesterday night had options for everyone on which a durable deal can be built, but with disagreements between countries, we fear that countries may try to escape from their responsibilities and water down the ambition elements that is crucial for stabilizing global average temperature at 1.5 degrees. Principles like equity and science need to be at the core of any climate deal. We agree here in Paris. These principles will define action plan that will prioritize to save those affected from climate-induced disasters already and would seek an ambitious action as per the capacity to mitigate greenhouse gas concentration in atmosphere from dangerous levels. The principles provide confidence to larger developing countries that developed countries are not shifting their responsibilities to them. In this context, Article 2 bis is important as it talks to progressivity of efforts of parties. Referring to this article, CBDR and RC is important to provide these assurance. Mitigation ambition is a must and should not be negotiated in a responsible global society and need to be implemented as per the capacity of countries to deliver on vehicles. Please read it as means of implementation that can drive mitigation higher on developing countries. Ongoing efforts of developed countries to undermine differentiation as per responsibility and capacity of countries, review of mitigation without taking in account the resources available and not addressing the ongoing permanent loss and damage are not welcomed by CAN South Asia. It's like reaching the World Cup final and not playing to your full capacity. We also believe that India can be champion of climate diplomacy in these final hours by showing flexibility on transparency, 5-year review, and pre-2020 facilitative dialogues. Thank you.
Srini?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I will be focusing on the mitigation ambition and our analysis of the text. Now, in our view, there is a lot in the text for countries to defend during the course of the day with regard to mitigation ambition. A couple of highlights on where we see that there is a lot to defend. One is a long-term goal to reach net zero emission in the second half of the century. Second, the significant development on finance, including the establishment of a 5-year cycle for setting collective climate finance goals in order to achieve the objectives of the long-term goal. Third, an aspirational goal to strive to keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But having said that, specifically what would we like to see emerge from the discussions and negotiations today in the final Paris Agreement? What we would like to see is a stronger emission reduction action before 2020, including enhanced implementation of pre-2020 commitments, which includes finance from developed countries. First round of review in 2019 to significantly improve current INDCs of developed countries and to enable implementation of conditional INDCs of developing countries. 3, an agreement on a long-term quantitative goal in line with what is required to keep temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, clearly with developed countries taking the lead with strong ratchet mechanism that would ramp up the INDCs progressively and ensuring that they provide the needed finance, technology, and the means to implementation for developing countries to ramp up their actions. From an India perspective, with 300 million people who do not have access to electricity and over 800 million people who do not have access to clean energy for meeting their cooking and heating requirements, and the home for perhaps the largest number of poor people in the world, we urge India to play a proactive role here in Paris to ensure that the Paris Agreement will result in creating an enabling framework for India and developing countries to leapfrog to a clean energy pathway that could eradicate not just energy poverty, but poverty as a whole, and contributing more than their fair share in keeping the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. We urge developed countries to ramp up provisions of support to delivery of the USD 100 billion per annum by 2020 and scaled up climate finance flows to support mitigation and adaptation efforts thereafter. And we urge all countries to agree on a 5-year cycle common political movement to revisit mitigation targets, informed by 5-yearly global stocktake covering all aspects of mitigation, adaptation, and means to implementation, and a science-based stocktake in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Harjeet.
Thank you, Srini. I'm going to talk about adaptation and loss and damage. The text on adaptation is decent and livable, and let me explain a couple of things that we had demanded. We wanted a strong global goal on adaptation. There is a language, if you look at the first paragraph, Article 4, page number 19, it does refer to global goal, but not exactly the same way we had demanded. We wanted global goal to take into account the needs of the people. We wanted it to have a clear reference with mitigation ambition, the temperature goal, and at the same time, the connection between mitigation, adaptation, loss, and damage. So that continuum. However, what we have on the table is it does talk about adaptive capacity, it does talk about strengthening resilience, but doesn't really, so the goal language is not there. It does talk about goal, but it doesn't specify the destination. For us, the destination was keeping people and planet safe. So that kind of a language is not there. But what we have on the table, as I said, it's livable. The connection to mitigation is there in para 4.4. So if we connect the two, I think the story is kind of complete. And then in the subsequent paragraphs, it unpacks what do we really mean by adaptation, which is good, and we wanted that to be elaborated, and it also refers to Cancun adaptation framework. So that's something good that we have on the table as of now. It also takes into account that global stocktake will include adaptation, something that we have been demanding, that it has to be holistic. So adaptation is going to be very much part of that. But on finance, which is key to enable implementation of adaptation actions in developing countries, that remains weak. My colleague Anup will talk more in detail. So there is some kind of a language there, but it's not yet there, and Anup will throw more light on that. Let me now move to the issue of loss and damage. And as you all know, this is one of the most contentious issues at this moment on the table. Let me explain the options we have. So there are two options broadly. One option is a very stripped down text which simply anchors the issue as a separate article. So you can see page 20, Article 5, where it just says what exactly the issue is, and that parties recognize the importance. And it stops there. It doesn't talk about institution. It doesn't talk about how to take it forward. So it's a very, very weak text. And then option 2, which is a more elaborated option, has a point number 3, which talks about explicit exclusion of liability and compensation. As you all know, this language was brought in by the United States, supported by Canada, Australia, and a couple of other countries. And what they want is so the article on loss and damage clearly excluding any future compensation and liability. Now, that has been a red line for us. And let me give you a bit of background. In September this year, developing countries dropped the word compensations, a word that has been with us for several years. They dropped it for a very simple reason, because they wanted to see concrete progress. And the proposal that was put forward was specifically talking about how to address the issue of displacement, as we are seeing how disasters increase displacement and drive people out of homes. There's an issue of permanent damage. Sea level is rising. People, sea is swallowing people's land. Land is becoming unproductive. So how do you really help people? So loss and damage, as you know, is about helping the affected people. It's not about something doing in advance. It's about how do you make sure, what kind of systems do you create to help people when they really get affected. Now, the reason developing countries dropped it, as I said, is to make substantive progress. But here, US, by bringing it back, actually has made it very, very difficult for us to proceed and to adopt option 2 as it is. So there is very intense negotiations right now going on to take that option out. We totally, as civil society, we understand the concern US has back home, where some people link loss and damage with the issue of compensation and liability. We don't look at it that way. And trust me, there are no developing countries are not thinking of going as a big bloc and going to sue developed countries. But excluding that actually takes your right to demand justice. We wanted rather to be silent about it because that was not an important issue at this juncture, and we wanted to really make progress on that. So that reference is not going to help the negotiations in the next few hours. And another reason we wanted a very strong mechanism on loss and damage was because it can help drive mitigation action. And now that pressure is actually off. So you can't imagine if not enough is done on mitigation and temperature rises to 4 degrees and islands sink, people have, their livelihoods are destroyed, people have no right. So you are actually taking away their right forever. And they have no right to demand justice because they are agreeing to exclude the whole issue of compensation now. So as I said, it's not important to talk about compensation at this moment because it really puts pressure for larger mitigation and adaptation action. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you to my co-panelists and greetings to everyone. I'll be talking about finance in the latest version of the text. In our reading, the latest version of the text is quite weak on adaptation finance, as well as it dodges on clear responsibility of developed countries to provide. Their intent to offload their burden is evident from the references to all sources of finance and effort to be shared by all parties. Overly focused on finance for mitigation by developing countries, the text will become a tool to create markets for developed country technologies if it becomes an agreement. Provisions in the context of global stocktake and short-term collective quantified goals are the only ray of hope as of now. We at CANSA note that developed country parties, through this text, have noted a lot of requirements that they actually needed to commit to. The lack of intent to provide finance that was initially communicated by skipping its mention in their INDCs has continued into the negotiations here. As the Paris momentum moves into the last hours, the various coalitions, alliances, and bilateral partnerships forged till date don't seem to be delivering long-term real support to developing countries. I'm happy to take after that.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was all very heavy, but the floor is open for questions. Please, yes. Front row.
Well, I have 2 questions. Jayanta Basu from Telegraph India. First, how you rate the latest draft in context to the draft that came before, in context to the specific components like differentiation, ambition, and finance? And what do you feel is what is going to be the tricky area in the coming few hours? And finally, Sanjay has been referring about the flexibility of India having the deal and all that. In what context you are thinking about India should be more flexible? What are the areas?
Finance.
You want to start with finance? Overall question.
All right, I'll initiate by talking about finance and the text's improvisation of flexibility from the previous version. Well, we were happy to see references to the short-term collective goal, quantified goal. This is something one of the key asks from the civil society. And we were also pushing for a stock take and review wherein it's not only for mitigation, but also for cycles of finance, so that in the context that 100 billion is not enough, is not going to be enough, so there needs to be a cyclical process for review of current assessments, and we see a reference to that. But to phrase it differently, we see these things as providing or answering the question of the what, but the how and the where is important also, that the text needs to clearly detail that. And which is why I had earlier referenced that we find it a bit weak on the adaptation finance, because even though it says that there needs to be a balance between adaptation and mitigation, but there needs to be a stronger language connecting the cycles with the matching the requirements of the parties for the context of adaptation. In paragraph 2, as of now, it says, if I can read it briefly, parties shall represent a progression beyond previous efforts from a floor of $100 billion per year, which is to be mobilized by developed country parties in the context of meaningful mitigation action and transparency on implementation. We are missing the word adaptation here. So they're clearly linking that they first want to see meaningful mitigation, and only then developing countries become eligible in a way for adaptation. So while there are some interesting elements as an improvisation from the previous version, but these things, in a way, derailed the whole process back, and we see it as a step back.
Well, Jayanto, to answer your first question on what's the difference between the earlier version and this version, the earlier version tried to accommodate the views of and demands of various broad groupings of countries. So virtually, if you actually analyze that text, you would see that it had almost everything that most country parties wanted or had put forth in their various submissions and interventions. Now, this version, basically what it tries to do is it tries to narrow down the options, and it tries to merge some of the options together, trying to come up with some sort of a language that could potentially be acceptable to all country parties. So in doing that, what could happen and what has happened is that depending on which country perspective you bring in, you would find that there are certain things that you would want, and there are certain things that automatically gets left off. So from a mitigation ambition perspective, I think there are a few good things that are still there in the text. Because at the end of the day, what's going to come out in Paris is going to be a compromised agreement, okay, something that is acceptable to all. So in this text, what my reading and our reading is that from a mitigation ambition, I think there are enough good things still there, and we hope that it doesn't get diluted even further. I hope that answers your question.
Sanjay, you want?
So I think the way French presidency is doing, they are respecting people's red lines and then pushing everybody towards the deal. If you look at 1.5 degree, it clearly addresses the concerns of AOSIS. Of course, you also have 2 degree. That's what US wants and several other countries want. They are not behind 1.5 very solidly, so they're trying to bridge that. If you look at the language on a long-term goal, it does not have decarbonization because they understand the concerns of the OPEC countries. I mean, of course, you can call it weak from that point of view, and it is not as strong as we would have liked it to be. But at the same time, they are trying to bring different parties together on that. Similarly, on finance, which is a key demand from developing countries, it has improved. It has some right elements, but as Anup said, it is weak, so it gives a lot of space for developed countries to kind of maneuvers. And on loss and damage, it is a separate article, which is a key demand from the developing country side, but then it also has the US option on liability. So right now it has respected everybody's red line, so all options are there on the table, and it's just that we need to see what gets traded off against the other.
Sorry, I'll be very quick. There's a specific question to me also. On transparency, which is Article 9, there's option 2, which talks about unified and robust transparency framework. And there's an on action as well as support. I'm sure there can be a common ground that could be found rather than, adamant that we don't want transparency. Transparency is also must in the context that we have very less time. Impacts are happening. Vulnerable people are increasing, actually, based on the impact. And that is why countries need to be transparent towards its people and those who are vulnerable, that what actions they are taking. Review cycle and pre-2020 facilitative dialogues, I will again link with the fact that we need to check very quickly based on the confidence the countries are going to have after successful implementation of RE, which we have seen has happened in the past also, that if countries can raise their ambition in terms of not only ambition on mitigation, but also on finance as the needs arise, but again, based on the equitable framework, because I mentioned equity also, and that is why review could also have a common ground.
Thank you. I have the gentleman in this row next to you, and then the lady in the third row. I have seen. I'm just running it through. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Eric Lyman from Bloomberg BNA. My question is well, two parts. One, something you touched on about the two options on loss and damage. If the U.S. option, the compensation option, is the one that's eventually adopted, does that close the door on that forever, or does that mean that it could be revisited later on? And then just sort of a general question for whoever would care to answer this, is the fact that it's being delayed further, do you see that as a positive thing or a negative thing? Is it likely to, is it because people are fighting for stronger action, or is it because they're, more things are being stripped out? I know that's just an opinion, but I'd like to know your opinions.
Quickly on loss and damage, yes, we have checked with legal experts. If it is adopted, okay, there were two things. If you read the line, it says, I'm at page 21. If you look at option 2 under point number 3, it says, the last line says, in a manner that does not involve or provide a basis for liability or compensation. That's the original US proposal. The next part of it, which says not prejudice existing rights under international law. This is, again, the G77 has brought it to neutralize part of it, because if you just talk about only, explicitly excluding liability and compensation, it has implications on the overall international law system much beyond UNFCCC. If it remains, it does have very strong implications here in UNFCCC. So it actually shuts the door for any kind of compensation or liability in this space. But you can still use international law for compensation, right? But not in this space, which, yeah, that's where the problem is. And as I said, no countries were planning to sue each other to get any money. That's not there. We all have been talking about solidarity and cooperation. But imagine if you reach a 4-degree, 5-degree world because somebody does not take any action on mitigation or doesn't provide money for transformation, what will happen to those vulnerable countries in the Pacific or in Africa? I think that's where the option is completely shut out.
And the delay?
Yeah, if you actually look at the past conferences, I think, and I would like to be stood corrected if I'm wrong, but this is the first time that we got the text so early, the first version, the second version, so early in the week. Earlier, I think we would get it much further, maybe towards Thursday or towards Friday even. So I think in that sense, the French presidency and they have accommodated the concerns of all, like as Harjeet also pointed out. So in my view, I think it's not, they're giving more time for parties to have one-on-one discussions and rounds of consultation. So I don't necessarily see that this delay is actually, I think it's actually for the good. Yeah. We are hopeful.
Thank you. Lady behind, and then Joydeep in the front row, and Kea at the back there.
Thanks,
I
Lisa.
only have 5 minutes. Yeah, please go on.
Sorry. Lisa Friedman from Climate Wire. Thank you. I just spoke to Minister Teixeira from Brazil, and she indicated that Brazil is likely going to join this high-ambition coalition that was announced the other day. I have to say, I don't really have a good sense of how together BASIC is at this point. I know they gave this press conference and said they are, but I'd love to get civil society's view first of how unified you think this group still is, and also what does it mean to have another major emerging economy essentially say, you know, we also see that there should be not a clear bifurcation, but more of a self-differentiation throughout the agreement. Does it make things difficult for India?
Let me start. Let's understand these groupings are formed based on collective or common interests, and that's the reality whether you talk about G77 or LDCs or AOCs or umbrella, whoever. But within that group also you have different interests, and when you talk about basics, same thing is with umbrella group as well, and same with EU, right? Even in the High Ambition Alliance, we have heard that not all countries in the EU are together on that. Not all ministers are on board. For example, I heard UK is not on board. So I think differences are going to be there. Within BASIC, if I talk from Indian perspective, India is a totally different country altogether. If you look at per capita emissions, China's per capita emissions are 5 times, close to 5 times of India, at per capita level. If you look at the size of Chinese economy, it's actually 10 trillion. India's economy is just 2 trillion. Of course, they are different. And at this pace, especially when we are talking about a common finish line, as I had said earlier as well, these countries are standing at different locations. They require a different quantum of effort to reach the same common finish line. So from that point of view, they understand that. And I think the way India is saying, India is not completely against dynamic differentiation, but at this moment, and given the development stage they are in, they would not like to spend a lot of political capital on that particular point. But it's not that they're completely averse to the idea. Had they adopted that approach, they would not have put such an ambitious target on the table without even saying explicitly that it is their conditional target. So I think all countries understand that how they are different from each other and what role they have to play. So at this moment, from developing countries' point of view, self-differentiation is happening and probably moving in the right direction.
We have 2 minutes. We have Kea before Joydeep at the back, right there. The other Kea.
My name is Joydeep.
Okay, my name is Kea Acharya. I'm a journalist from India. You know, I have a basic question that I'm very puzzled about. None of what is going on right now is legally binding. Yet why are we spending so much time on dissecting each word? You all are civil society. How does that affect you so much, since you need to work in the field, not worry about the words anyway? They'll be doing it themselves, whatever they want to.
It's a very, very interesting question and a very important question. My very simple answer to that is that, we've been pushing for a legally binding agreement here. The civil society groups have been pushing for a legally binding agreement, and we do hope that that this would lead these negotiations here at some point of time would lead to a legally binding and internationally legally binding agreement, and not something that is self-differentiating.
Joydeep, very quickly, we have 1 minute. My colleagues from US CAN are waiting.
Haven't heard anything on tech transfer. Are you happy with the tech transfer bit?
Well, more or less, I think that the technology aspects have been covered. I think the IPR would still be a tricky issue, but I think the parties must have decided to leave it for next year or different crops to discuss this further.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are all available at the back for any bilaterals, any questions, and thank you once again for coming. Bye.